Really quick, my other question on Jalen Ramsey is, what dictates his alignment? Is it he plays one side, he's playing based on the defensive play call, and he's in different spots based on the coverage? Or
he's on the left side more often than he's not.
Left side of the defense?
Left side of the defense. Left side of the defense. So,
which is the right side of the offense,
right.
Which is where Jamar Chase happens to run, I think, roughly 2-to-1, 67% or so of his routes.
Yeah, so that's typically where he is. They will play him in the slot a lot too, depending on what the offensive configuration is. They will move him around. He is mostly on the left side of the defense, but he's not Richard Sherman, who you're going to lock in one spot, and that's where he is, and no matter where it is, no matter what they're doing offensively, he's going to be in that spot, but more often than not, he's on the left.
And we know Ramsey, how great he is, probably the best cornerback in the NFL. After him, and you mentioned some of the secondary, how is this Rams secondary? Because we know the Rams are going to win in the trenches defensively compared to the Bengals offensive line. But how big of the advantage is the Bengals skill players, specifically the receivers, versus everyone not named Jalen Ramsey?
I think if you go down the list of all the things that the Rams do well, that the Bengals do well, more of them will be on the Rams side. The soft spot of this team is in that secondary. The soft spot of this team is at the linebacker position, where you got Troy Reader, you've got Ernest Jones, you've got some guys in there, but that's not where Darius Williams was really good last year. He's been okay this year. They've had all sorts of trouble at safety, whether it's with injuries. And Taylor Rapp will knock your head off, but he can't cover anybody, right? So he's a guy that you don't want to see a ton in coverage. Eric Weddle's here because he frees Jalen Ramsey up to do some things that Jalen Ramsey will free. We saw what happened in the divisional round, right? Mike Evans goes by him. Yeah. Jalen Ramsey taking a shot right there. He thought he saw something. It didn't work out, and they hit him over the top. But that's where the opportunities, I think, are for the Bengals with the Rams in that secondary, in the middle of the field. They're going to kill you up front. They're really good with their front part of their defense, but the back part, I think, is the soft spot. And I'll turn it around for you guys. If the Rams are on offense, where's the soft spot for them to attack?
Yeah, that's a pretty interesting question, because I've been trying to speculate about Lou Anarumo's defense all week, and the one guy that always stands out, and he's been playing well, so maybe we should stop going to him, is Eli Apple, who is, out of the three starting corners they have, the least decorated, probably the least successful, but he's been more than serviceable, I would say, in the playoffs. But regardless of that, I think the Rams have to look at the Cooper Kupp matchup, because the way Sean McVay calls offense, it just puts so much stress and uses defensive rules against them. And when Kupp is running that weak side option route and gets singled up on Mike Hilton was great against him in 2019 when he played for the Steelers. Cooper Kupp's come a long way since then. And so anytime Cooper Kupp is singled up, I don't see this being too terribly different than previous matchups, but I would give the Bengals credit as well for doing a great job against Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce against the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes in that game, where they identified the weapons and took them away. But beyond that, I think that, I don't know what Lou Anarumo is going to do in this game. It's kind of where I'm at right now, because it's been such disparate game plans between the Titans 2 weeks ago, the Chiefs last week, or I guess maybe 2 weeks ago now, whatever day it is.
Several years ago, it feels like at times, yeah.
And against the Rams, you can't be one-dimensional on defense, because I think Sean McVay, if you play the drop-8 stuff, he's going to be willing to run the ball, regardless of what Cam Akers has done in the playoffs. And maybe we'll talk about what's gone wrong with the Rams' run game. I think that there might be opportunities there if they say, we don't care if you run, which is what they did against the Chiefs, and they can't do that against Sean McVay's willingness to run the ball. But what's going on with that running game?
I think that we were talking a little bit before we started recording the pod that Sean McVay occasionally will get stubborn in what he wants to do. And I think that's probably a good trait 95% of the time. I have a belief in what I do, and we're going to make sure that we do it really well. I do think that one of the things that he struggled with in the early part of the season was his reluctance to run even when it wasn't working. And in the second half, when the Rams went through November and didn't win a game, and they were just doing the same thing over and over again. They were trying to get Cooper Kupp going. They were trying to throw the ball. They were trying to run the offense that they run. And then Jacksonville came to town at exactly the right time. Let them kind of get right and catch your breath. But it was Sony Michel was finally fully integrated in the offense at that point. Darrell Henderson had been hurt, so he was the guy. And then you bring Cam Akers back towards the end, and even when they're not getting a ton of success on the ground, he keeps running the ball. So I think you're right. I think that if he's going to run the ball, whether they're having a great deal of success or not. I think that the Niners were pretty good against the run. They didn't have a ton of success. The Bucks were a little better in the second half than they were in the first half. The Rams were being far more conservative in the second half of that game. And, everybody in the stadium knew they weren't going to start to light it up. They had a 20-point lead going into that. So I think there's some extenuating circumstances, but I do expect him to be not committed to the run like, the Oilers of the 1970s, but I think they will run and it'll open up some opportunities.
Do you have the feel that this is going to be a shootout? Because these are two offenses that have been described as really explosive, but to me, looking at the way their playoffs have gone for both teams, they've been grinding them out games, close games, not terribly high scoring, and a lot of people seem to like the offenses in this game, and I don't know if I see it that way. I know, James, you love offense.
Not this week. No,
Yeah.
I think it's going to be slow it down. It's going to be a lot like the Bengals. To me, put it like this. If the Bengals are in it, it's going to be a lot like it's been in Tennessee. It was 19-16, 27-24 in overtime against the Chiefs, but it was a dogfight.
Mm-hmm.
I think that probably is how the Bengals won it. They don't want to have to drop Burrow back 50 times to try to keep up with Matt Stafford because in that offense. And do you view it that way? Do you think it's going to be that way? Do you think the Rams want to?
I think if it's in the teens, the Rams are in trouble. I don't think that's how they want to play it. I think that the way that the Bengals play and the way the Rams play, if you're getting into the high 20s and 30s, I think you like the Rams' chances better. If it's in the low 20s and the high teens, then it's probably a Cincinnati game. The Rams score. Even when they aren't quite firing on all cylinders, they're going to hit one or two big plays. They're going to have a touchdown probably just like that. They tend to have one or two of those. And one of the things that the Rams defense does really well, they'll give up a lot of yardage. You can move the ball, and I know that the Bengals have struggled in the red zone a little bit. They kicked a lot of field goals. They haven't scored a lot of touchdowns.
12 field goals in the playoffs.
Right. And so that, I think, is good news for the Rams because they give up yardage, but once you get into that red area, they tend to stiffen up pretty good.
I want to ask you about Odell Beckham Jr. and Van Jefferson because
Mm-hmm.
it isn't just Cooper Kupp. He gets all the headlines and rightfully so, but Odell Beckham Jr. seems to have found a home. It seems like it's working. I covered him in Cleveland a little bit when it wasn't working with Freddie Kitchens. This feels much.
It feels more like a Freddie Kitchens problem than an OBJ problem, but sure.
And maybe a little Baker in there as
yeah,
well.
Sure.
How's Odell been outside of the stats, watching him, and how does Van Jefferson fit?
Yeah, so I've said this a couple of times. I'll call it on here too. Van Jefferson will catch a big pass on the opening drive or two. It's you can write the script by it. That I think everybody that gets ready to play the Rams, how do we stop Cooper Kupp? How do we stop Cooper Kupp? How do we deal with OBJ? And Van Jefferson, it seems he's open by 10 yards on the first or second drive every time, and they'll hit, and it's a 25-yard, it's a chunk play. So I think that he's not an 8-ball a game guy, but when it's going him, you're taking a shot. So I think that's the Jefferson part of it. When they made the deal for Beckham, Robert Woods was still healthy, right? Yeah. So it was more of a why not kind of thing as opposed to, hey, we really need this guy. It didn't feel like you needed him. Is he going to disrupt it? It was, if this is any problem at all, we don't need it. You got Robert Woods. Well, Woods gets hurt about 5 minutes after it's done, and now he has to play well. And he has. I haven't heard one thing from a player, one thing from a staffer, people inside the building that cover this team. He's been a model player. He's been a great teammate. He's obviously performed at a very, very high level. It was arguably one of the most important acquisitions they made all season because if it's as good as Cooper Kupp is, if he's your only guy, and especially with Tyler Higbee hurt coming into this game, he's unlikely to play as your starting tight end. You're going to need somebody else that's going to draw some attention, and I don't know if anybody draws more attention than OBJ.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting. That's takes me back to the Tennessee game, thinking about the Bengals again here. The first play of that game, Derrick Henry's back, and everyone's like, oh yeah, Derrick Henry's getting the first play of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Bengals play single high, and they run a little play action pass, and Jesse Bates comes from the post safety and picks it off.
Right.
So the chess match between coaches in this game is, obviously the players make plays decide the game, but the schematic stuff is really interesting to me as well because to me, Lou Anarumo's found answers in the second half, specifically in these playoff games, and against the Titans really for the whole game. But will Sean McVay be the guy that looks at Lou Anarumo's adjustment and then makes the change?
Kind of a counterpuncher, right? Like
Right.
who can make the most second adjustments?
Right.
Sean McVay has been a mixed bag in that regard. Sometimes he's had some success doing it. Sometimes, like we talked about earlier, he's a little more stubborn. The one thing the Rams have not done throughout the entire postseason is play two good halves in the same game. They against Arizona, they got up really early, and then they kind of took their foot off the gas. Like, we're not going to show anything else. This one's in our back pocket, and they were kind of flat and uninspired in the second half. Tampa, they were lights out in the first half and barely held on in the second half. The game against San Francisco, they couldn't do really anything. I shouldn't say they shouldn't do anything. They struggled to score points in the first half. They moved the ball, but they didn't score. But, they didn't score, and then the second half, boom, it started to happen all over again. If they can put two halves together, and maybe that's what you're kind of talking about, is the adjustments, and more often than not, the second half has been the weaker of the two halves for the Rams. We'll see, because we know the number. It's 47-1. Sean McVay has the lead at the half. They are 47-1. And so and the one loss was to San Francisco in Week 18 this year, and they blew a 10-point lead. So with a lead, I like their chances.
And what's odd about that, the Bengals have been a second half team.
Right.
They've rallied back multiple times in big moments. So the other part, you mentioned the chess match. There's so many connections.
Yeah.
Obviously, McVay and Taylor. We know that, and the connection there. But with Matt Stafford, Brian Callahan was Matt Stafford's quarterbacks coach with the Lions. So Andrew Whitworth, knows this staff and called Zach Taylor after hanging out with Joe Burrow. So there's a lot of connections in this one for sure.
Yeah, I think that's the only two way the Lions can get to the Super Bowl is to go to two different teams, and they'll find their way in through the back door, I guess.
Detroit.
Hey, we love them, right? Yeah, I mean, the Andrew Whitworth thing is really interesting. Obviously, I spent the vast majority of his career in Cincinnati. He was one of the most important pieces that they picked up. That when Sean McVay got the job, they went out and got Andrew Whitworth. They went out and got John Sullivan. And John Sullivan came in, played center for them for a couple of years, and did a really good job. But it felt like Whitworth at the time was, okay, let's just give Jared Goff a little peace of mind that you got the pros pro on your blind side. Well, he's been here for 5 years, and he's still playing at about as high a level. It sounds like this is the end of it. It doesn't sound like he has any interest in going beyond it. He certainly could if he wanted to. But, yeah, I think it kind of closes the circle, right, that he started in Cincinnati and maybe gets a chance to win a Super Bowl against his former team.
A lot of fun things to watch in this Super Bowl. The stories, the X's and O's, the players. I think it, despite some of the analytics community calling these pretty bad Super Bowl teams, despite them being 4 seeds, I think that this has the makings of a really good football game and the continuation of what's been a tight, hotly contested, and really entertaining playoff run. We'll continue to have you covered here from Radio Row and after the game on the Locked On Podcast Network. Locked On Rams, Locked On Bengals. Get them anywhere you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow from Radio Row.